This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. We will be starting shortly. If you could please type your name into the chat box for record of attendance. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We will be starting shortly. Thank you for joining us. If you could please type your name into the chat box for a record of attendance. You're Ryan, we do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll give everybody about 3 more minutes and then we'll kick this meeting off. Good morning. We got about another minute. It looks like we have one person that's just called in. They're not using the actual video platform. If you are on the phone only and not using the video, can you let us know who you are for attendance purposes?
I don't hear anything.
Good morning, everybody. It's 9:30. We do have a quorum, so I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. Thank you, Michael, for identifying yourself on the phone. Now we will open the floor for public comment. Is there anybody on the phone or on the line that would like to offer public comment? Seeing none, we will move to agenda item 3, which is the staff update. That's pages 5 and 6 in your packet.
Yes, sir. We have the November and December meetings up on the screen. November for policy board will be electronic as well. For December, we will notify you. They will more than likely be electronic as well, but we will update you as those meetings near. The call for projects is now open. As you are aware, the deadline for that is November the 13th, and the remaining reprioritization schedule is on the screen as well. And we will go into, at a later agenda item, the TxDOT review of projects, but that is coming up later this week as well. Air quality for the month of October was 61 parts per billion at the Temple station and 60 parts per billion at the Killeen station. You're Ryan, that is all.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for staff update? Seeing none, we will move to agenda item 4, which is an action item. It's regarding the approval of the minutes from the October 7th, 2020 meeting. I hope everybody's had a chance to review these. If you see any changes that need to be made, let us know. If there are no questions or discussion, I'll entertain a motion. I have a motion from Joseph and a second from Jason. With no further discussion or comments, All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Agenda item 5 is a discussion and an action item regarding the recommendation of approval of the public participation plan and the limited English proficiency plan. Kendra?
Yes, these items are included at the back of the packet in the appendix. The public participation plan and the Title VI and LEP plan are to be updated every 3 years. We are a little ahead of schedule on this, but we did go out for public involvement for 45 days during the months of September and November with no comments received. So today we are bringing this back before TAC for recommendation of approval.
Thank you, Kendra. Are there any questions or comments on either of these plans? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to recommend approval. And I have a motion from Joseph and a second from Robert. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 6 is a discussion and action item regarding the recommendation to approve amendments to the FY21 to 24 Transportation Improvement Program, TIP, and the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Program, MTP, for Project W3507, Project W3501, and Project W3023. Kendra?
Yes, sir. These projects were brought before the TAC in October. They went out for public involvement for 15 days, also during the month of October. And we had a public involvement process as well, a hearing on November the 2nd. No public comments were received on these projects, and we do bring them before the TAC today for recommendation of approval to the policy board.
Are there any questions for staff on these or comments? Seeing no questions or comments, I will entertain a motion to recommend approval of these amendments. And I have a motion from Robert Lewis. And a second from Danielle. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no, and that motion carries. Agenda item 7 is a discussion item regarding the upcoming TxDOT review of the proposed MTP projects. You should have all received a survey sent out by James yesterday and in previous days, looking for times for people who are submitting, or jurisdictions that are submitting projects on system projects for TxDOT to assist with the review of those. Many of those have been scheduled. If you haven't scheduled one, please reach out to staff if you didn't get that survey. That being said, Victor is on the line to speak to this, I believe.
Sure. So I know Kendra's been setting up meetings between TxDOT and these cities so far. When we do sit down and meet with y'all, it'll be pretty much kind of like we've done in the past for the cities that have met with us, and that we just kind of go through, you can go through the projects that you're planning on submitting, and we can look at them and see if we find any flaws with them, or if there's any way we would make suggestions on to get a better project or to get the estimate more in check. So it's really informal, and it's just kind of our way to hopefully get everybody on the same page and help each other out so that we end up with really high quality projects.
Thank you, Victor. Are there any questions or comments about this agenda item? As you can see on the screen, there are the scheduled times so far for the jurisdictions.
I was going to ask, Kendra, do we have everybody listed scheduled, or is there still some outstanding that we aren't meeting with yet?
This is all that is scheduled.
Okay.
We do know that Bell County will not be submitting projects, so they will not be meeting with TxDOT. So unless there's any other smaller entities, our small towns that Bell County represents, this should be it.
Thank you. No further discussion on that. We will move to agenda item 8, which is a discussion item regarding direct state costs. We have some representatives from TxDOT on the line to speak to this. Following our last TAC meeting, there was some confusion and we needed some clarification on direct state costs, so we're bringing this back before you in this agenda item. Who is on the line from TxDOT to speak to this?
Ryan, this is Brenton. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is Brenton Lane from TxDOT Waco District. Yeah, this is something that we have put a lot of effort in to try to be as clear up front as we can. I know historically it seems like a lot of times these discussions don't typically happen full swing until we're developing the AFA, and so it's good to have this discussion up front. I'm glad there were some questions asked, and in trying to determine how we typically handle direct state costs. One thing we looked at doing was coming up with the matrix that you see on your screen there on the right, and I guess I'll start with that. So we know how we typically like to do things, but one thing I would like to caution against this matrix is that there are exceptions to every rule. I'll be honest, working at TxDOT for 15 years, I'm surprised that we didn't have a chart like this prior to our little investigation. But I think the reason why we haven't is because there are exceptions to every rule. And so it's a little unsettling to put numbers and percentages against every category and every type of project because there will be things that don't necessarily align with the chart in front of us. So the chart in front of us is really just kind of our off the cuff if we know nothing about the project other than whether it's on or off system and what category of funding it's going for. This is the general way that we'll handle it. So in developing this matrix, we've done a lot of internal searching as far as how we typically handle these costs. We've reached out to division staff in Austin on how they handle certain programs, and even, kind of spot checked it with other districts around TxDOT. And so the way the chart is broken down is very similar to the budget page on an AFA. The top section there is the actual project cost. This is going to be the cost incurred to actually conduct the preliminary engineering and develop the PS&E. It's going to be the actual cost incurred with the environmental and right-of-way studies and acquisition. It's the real cost of the project. And so in that section, you will see that really the locals, would be responsible for pretty much 100% of the cost, except for construction. The MPO oversees construction dollars, and so the 20% there is for the local responsibility on the construction for the local let projects. So you can kind of follow along on the chart. Definitely, as you're looking at it, if you have questions, come up with it. But then the second part down there is the direct state cost, and that is what tends to be the topic of discussion lately, and kind of our understanding of when those direct state costs would come back to the local that submitted the project, and when TxDOT would cover those direct state costs. So we'll go through the questions after I get through the chart here that kind of better explain the chart, if you will. But the chart basically for direct state costs, the general rule of thumb is that if it's on system, TxDOT covers the direct state cost. If it's off system, we don't. That being said, there are some projects that we found that are on system where the locals were asked to cover direct state costs, and a lot of that boils down to the nature of the project and whether or not it's a TxDOT priority and whatnot. But in general, TxDOT will cover the direct state cost at 100% for anything on system. There's rules in place about off-system projects and what we can and can't spend state money on. And so it's really not a point of discussion from what I've heard about whether or not TxDOT can cover those costs, because if it's off-system, that would be considered a misuse of state funds to pay for the direct state costs associated with that. There is one section that I'll draw your attention to on the Cat-9 direct state cost. It says 20% to 100%. And the reason why I put that in there is because there is a minute order being considered right now, and I think it's supposed to go to the commission in December, that would change some of the funding rules for the Cat-9 program. What they're looking at, if I'm understanding it correctly, and again, we're still really diving into this, is that for cities that are 50,000 or less, they could have 80% of the direct state cost reimbursed by the feds. And so that'll be something, which is why you see the 20%. That'll be something that we'll cross that bridge when it gets there, but it could be coming. And then too, just high level, this chart is the local government funding responsibility. So when you see 0%, that doesn't mean that there's not cost associated with that. It just means that the local government would not be responsible for any of those costs. So that's kind of a high level on the chart. At this point, I'll go through the questions that have been submitted to date. And a lot of these questions is what kind of generated us wanting to put together a chart to kind of help with clarification on it. But question one, I'm going to go over these questions just to make sure that everybody understands. And if there's more questions that anybody on the line has, we'd be glad to answer it. But question one, is TxDOT going to complete the entire environmental assessment, or is the city responsible for hiring and paying the cost of the environmental? So in general, the city should plan on completing the environmental work or hiring a third-party firm to handle environmental assessments for all non-Cat 2 projects. I didn't point it out on the chart, but basically with Cat 2 projects, TxDOT pretty much covers everything on those projects except for the amount that is required for right-of-way and utilities, which I believe is 10% unless you're economically disadvantaged. But the little caveat on the Cat 2 is that it would need to be done within the TxDOT timeframe. I know we've had some Cat 2 projects where we look at our internal resources and we know that we're not going to be able to get around to developing the project till 2025 or 2026. And when that's the case, I know sometimes the locals take on some of the upfront work to keep the project moving. So, but in general, TxDOT covers that. So all environmental work must be coordinated with TxDOT's environmental staff. Depending on project complexity, location of the project, and availability of our TxDOT environmental staff, TxDOT may participate in the environmental work, but this should not be planned for when making your project submission. TxDOT will provide environmental services for Category 2 funded on-system projects if they're developed according to the TxDOT availability and timeframe, which is what I was just talking about. So in general, TxDOT does not cover the environmental. That is something that the locals would do for all non-Cat 2 projects. I put that sentence in there about, depending on project complexity, location of project, and availability of TxDOT environmental staff, just because, again, there's exceptions to every rule. And though I think everybody on behalf of TxDOT agrees that the environmental assessment is something that the locals would be responsible for, I did find a few cases of, super small projects where I guess our environmental coordinators here in the district had a free day and they could clear it. So I'm not going to say it doesn't ever happen, but in general, especially when you're submitting projects, I would plan for that work needing to be handled by the locals. Question 2, is construction oversight as required by TxDOT and eligible expense paid with KTMPO funds? So if the project is state-led and on-system, construction oversight will be provided by TxDOT. Basically, if it's on our system and it's state-led, we're going to want to be out there. We're going to be doing the oversight, and so there would not be any local involvement other than if you guys just wanted to double check on your project and make sure things were going the way you wanted them to. Construction oversight for all other projects would be provided by the local government, however. So all of the off-system projects, the on-system local let would be provided by the locals. That doesn't mean that I know in our local government office we'll still do site visits. I know our two local government coordinators go out and do routine site visits on all the projects. That's not necessarily construction oversight though. That's just that's making sure that things are being built according to the guidelines for reimbursement. Question 3 and 4 was basically asking for an estimate of direct state costs for on-system versus off-system projects. And, you know, at first I would like to say direct state costs are highly variable depending on the project complexity. So we may have 2 sidewalk projects that construction dollar-wise are the exact same cost, but one project goes through an environmentally sensitive area with, you know, possible right-of-way or utility issues, where the other project is on wide open right-of-way, just filling in gaps of existing sidewalk. And so in that case, the direct state cost, though the construction costs may be very similar, the direct state cost could vary quite a bit between those 2 projects. Historically, Waco has used kind of a flat percentage based on the construction costs, and I know I've reached out to a couple other districts, and that tends to be the way that they do it. I was told by a group in Austin that they typically plan on around 15% of the total construction costs being direct state costs. You know, I would say for planning purposes, if you know nothing else about the project and haven't had a chance to dive in and really, you know, figure out what all is needed for direct state costs, 15% would be just kind of a good rough figure to run with. Again, once we get to the AFA phase and we're trying to determine those direct state costs, you know, especially if we know more about the project, that might allow us to go in and really try to get a better estimate of what we think that project is going to need regarding environmental, or if there's, you know, heavy public involvement needed or whatnot. We might could come up with better estimates. But for project submission, if it looks like it's a project that you're going to be responsible for the direct state cost, a rule of thumb that I have been told works well is 15% of the total construction costs. Question 5 is PS&E to be part of the project budget counted as local match? If so, will grantees be required to use TxDOT rules for procurement of PS&E? So I guess first off, I wanted to clarify when we say PS&E, I'm assuming that we're talking about the preliminary engineering cost, the actual cost, not the direct state cost. So it's a little confusing at times when we have preliminary engineering listed in direct state cost and then preliminary engineering listed in the actual cost. Preliminary engineering and the actual cost is the money that we actually spend, or the locals actually spend, to go hire an engineering firm and have the plans developed. The preliminary engineering and the direct state cost would be the cost associated with our own internal TxDOT reviews and processing of the plans. So there's a difference there. I want to make sure that we understand that. So for the purpose of this question, I'm going to assume that PS&E is the preliminary engineering actual cost, not direct state cost. And right now, the MPO has elected not to allow program funds to cover PE costs. Personally, I feel like this decision was made well before I got here, but personally, I feel like it's a cleaner decision. It allows the MPO to use their funds and plan their funds for construction. It prevents the MPO from going and spending program funds on preliminary engineering for projects that may not score well, may not even be feasible, and there's some real costs associated with that. You know, if that were to happen, that would take away from funding of other construction projects. Second, that would kind of complicate things if the MPO did elect to cover PE costs, was that the procurement rules would apply anytime federal money is used to reimburse these costs. So essentially, if you have a project and you're hoping to use that project as a local match or get it reimbursed, which right now the MPO has and the policy board has elected not to do that. But if you wanted to, you would have to make sure that you were going and using the federal procurement rules for selecting your consultant, which means I know it seems like a lot of local governments have engineering firms under contract that act as their city engineer. You would not necessarily be able to just use that engineering firm or person to do your engineering work. You would actually have to go through the federally approved procurement process for selecting a vendor, if you will, for those projects. And so it does kind of muddy the water there. And then two, it would have to, I believe, get approved through the STIP. The engineering phase would have to get approved in the STIP. So it could slow progress down. But long story short, the NPO right now uses their funds to cover construction costs. And so I guess the easy answer to this is that the PSNE would not be counted as a local match and it would not be eligible for reimbursement. And that if you're submitting a project and it's not a Cat 2 project, the locals should plan on covering the PE cost at 100%. Question 6, is construction administration as required by TxDOT an eligible expense paid with KTMPO funds? Again, this goes back to the construction, the NPO funds, and Ryan Kendra, y'all can correct me if I'm not understanding this or if I've said something that's slightly out of line, but right now the NPO funds go 100% for construction costs. So any of the additional costs like preliminary engineering or construction administration would not be covered by KTMPO funds. That said, as I mentioned when we were going over the chart, anything on system, TxDOT would be providing construction administration on. So, those projects, you would not have to provide construction administration or even reimburse the direct state costs on that. So I believe that gets through most of the questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the questions, look at the chart. You can definitely reach out to Victor or I if you have further questions. But yeah.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for Brenton or comments? Thank you for that input. It's very insightful. I am not seeing any questions coming through.
I think I put them all to sleep.
Seeing no questions, thank you, sir. Like I said, that was very insightful and very helpful. The discussions we had with you helped staff a lot in understanding those direct state costs. Moving along, agenda item 9 is a discussion and action item regarding recommendation for Category 7 on-system roadway project match requirements and transit allocation.
Yes, we brought this item before the TAC during last month's meeting, and we decided to table this item to get further clarification on the items that we just discussed on direct state costs. So we are bringing this back before you today to go over the match requirements and the allocation for transit. The match requirements for Category 2 are 80% federal or 20% state or 100% state funded. The Category 7 can either be 80% federal, 20% local, or state dollars depending on the system type. So for off-system, it is an 80-20 local match. For on-state system, it is either 80-20 state or 80-20 local. And Category 9 is 80-20 local. And there is a historical listing of the match that has been chosen for the on-system Category 7 on your screen. And our most recent selection in December 2018, the match for FY 21 to 22 Category 7 on-system roadways was 20% local. We did make a notation that matching Category 7 on-system federal dollars with local dollars will maintain consistency in our current TIP and allows for the state dollars to fund more projects in the region. And then on to the next topic of this item is the transit allocation. You can see there on your screen that for FY 21 to 24, the various category amounts of funding that are anticipated based on the 2021 UTP, and 10% of Category 7, which has been historically approved by the policy board to fund fixed route Hill Country Transit District buses for their bus replacement projects, would be in the amount of 2.354 or 10% based on this current UTP allocation. Again, the 10% would be the approval or the item recommended for approval, the rate. That may change the actual dollar amount as the UTP changes from year to year, but the item discussed would be the rate of 10%. Here, Ryan?
Thank you. Are there any questions for Kendra on those items?
Here, Ryan, this is Danielle. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I think it would be worth our time to consider whether or not for that 20% match, where it's appropriate, that there be a process by which an entity can request to have their match be met by the design dollars or whatnot. Still have the 20% requirement, but maybe with a special vote on a particular project that there's some flexibility if an entity wanted to consider their match through design or whatnot.
I'm not, Kendra, is that something that has been explored in the past to your knowledge?
I believe there has been a time several cycles ago, perhaps, where that was done. Jason might have more of a historical perspective on that. But as what we have come to understand is more through a consensus of the match being through the dollars and the MPO dollars going towards the construction only, but not allowing the engineering to count towards match. Jason, do you have anything to add on to that from your time here?
I don't recall if we ever allowed for that. I know we've had some discussions after the project was funded about, we had some questions with, which was it, one of, you put me on the spot and I don't recall off the top of my head.
Sorry.
Yeah, it seems like there was some bigger projects where after it was funded, there was still some design that was being, and right away that was being finalized, as well as some other in-kind. But you'll forgive me, I don't recall specifically. And I think we asked the question and the answer was no. But I don't have a real clear answer for you at the time. That predominantly it's been, you know, that you match your construction dollars.
Thank you, Jason.
So,
And
Daniel, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if there were any other entities that were interested in discussing that possibility, or if the consensus is, you know, that's not an appropriate use of the dollars for KTMPO funding.
This is Victor. I want to add something in there, kind of what Brenton was sitting on earlier too, in that if you use your PE as your 20% match, you're going to have to go through the federal procurement process again, like what he was talking about, since those are going to be federal dollars. So that's just something else to keep in mind. It's not necessarily easy as just going and you know, picking your local engineering firm that you use all the time. You have to go through an actual selection process and take it out for solicitation if you're going to do something like that and get reimbursed for it, or use it as part of your match.
Thank you, Victor. Are there any other thoughts, comments? I'm not seeing anything come through. So, not seeing anything further, any further questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion to recommend we have to get a recommendation, correct, Kendra?
That's
for either
right.
the 20 to be local or state, correct?
That's
And
right.
right now, as it is with our previous, when we did this previously in 2018, those were all local dollars. It was the 20% local. So I would entertain a motion to recommend approval of one of the options for match, as well as the transit district allocation.
I think what she might be trying to get to, this is Kara from Nolanville, is allowing some type of ability to consider the PSNE for that 20% in certain circumstances. For instance, if a small city, I'll just use Nolanville as an example, is trying to get a bridge repaired, the cost for that engineering plus a 20% match to have the bridge done is, almost to the point where it's not feasible. So I think that she's trying to say is, in certain circumstances, is there a way to make this motion so that there's that kind of consideration for the individual project?
Kara, I think there's a way to make it. I just don't have the wording for it. So I'm open to any.
Maybe if the motion is made to allow for the TAC to entertain requests for in-kind PSNE to be part of the 20% local match, on with special approval.
Yeah, Ryan, I believe that in 2018, when we had elected to go with the local match of the 20% for the on-system Cat 7, instead of going with the state match, the consensus was to go with the local match. And then if there were any case-by-case situations that would be considered. And I think that might fall in line with what Kara is requesting, and Danielle as well. Maybe the case-by-case evaluation of why an entity could not would then be considered.
Okay, so we could entertain a motion for the 20% local match with
for construction dollars, and then by exception for PSNE in kind with TAC approval.
Are we saying that the default match is for on system is the 20% local?
20% local with exceptions. I believe that is how we worded it. Because I believe it was Brian Chandler that asked this specific question, with 20% being local dollars with extenuating circumstances, exceptions brought before the TAC, if that
it could be state.
So
the default is if you apply for an on-system Cat 7 project, you expect to commit yourself to 20% local, but you can have the discussion and it would come out of, TxDOT having the funds available. Would it require a TAC? Would it be part of the motion to approve, taking that when that project gets put into the TIP, say it was a TIP amendment or whatever, then part of that motion is to also approve that we're going to upgrade it to a state match instead of the local, because TxDOT has the money and other extenuating reasons. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's familiar with what was discussed. Yes, it would be 20% local, and for extenuating circumstances, it would then be discussed for the state to cover that 20%.
Okay.
Victor, Brenton, do y'all have any conflict with that?
I guess the only thing I want to mention is what Jason was saying about if TxDOT has the funds, just keep in mind those funds it'll come out of that same Cat 7 pot. So
right.
if if it does get elected to spend on that, that's that many fewer projects that we don't get to do in Cat 7 because they're tied up with the local match.
Right.
So again, to go back to Danielle and Kara's questions about using PS&E as in-kind, again, the conversation in the past was not to use that as in-kind, but to consider a state 20% for those extenuating circumstances that could not be met by local dollars.
I think that would be way cleaner than trying to go through the in-kind with the PS&E because, like we mentioned, with the federal process that you'd have to go through and all the verification and stuff. So I think that would be way better.
And those circumstances, correct me if I'm wrong, would be, they would have to be, the change from a local to a state match in that instance would be subject to TAC and policy board approval.
Correct.
And I would assume you could not do that for an off-system roadway if that's the route we went, correct?
It would be on system only.
Yeah. And I can see, like Victor said, it would potentially deplete the Cat 7, but I know in the past where we've, had projects come in ranked, and the question was always, how do we shuffle the projects around based on the fiscal year, what was available, and the project dollars never matched the available funding dollars. So, I mean, I just want to have the most flexibility possible. That, yeah, if we get to that time frame, and those are the Cat 7 projects that TAC and Policy Board wants to move forward, that we at least have the flexibility that if there's whatever 20% match, whatever is remaining unallocated in Cat 7 could go towards the project. And specifically, and I'm not saying this because I'm Temple trying to find one more way to get some money, but for the smaller cities where that 20% match is going to hit their budget, it's going to be a much deeper cut than the bigger cities. So I think having that flexibility for the MPO to put that Cat 7 match to on-system projects for the smaller cities, I think would be a boon. But that's my opinion, and that'll buy you a cup of coffee on Friday morning.
Okay, is there any further discussion?
I want to make sure I understand. So for Cat 7 on system is what we're talking about. And what's being said is that basically the 20% could be state covered or locally covered. And in the case that it's locally covered, what Kara was asking for is maybe some consideration to have 20% of that or their 20% local responsibility handled with an in-kind match on their preliminary engineering cost. Am I understanding that correct?
No, sir. What we have clarified is that for the on-state system Cat 7 projects, the recommended motion would be a federal local grant match rate. But for extenuating circumstances, that 20% would be considered, brought back before the TAC and the policy board, considered for state match and not using in-kind PS&E as any match.
Okay.
Right,
So right now,
basically having the ability to take it from local, and if you have extenuating circumstances, we can slide it into a state match.
okay. So right now, the item that is on the floor before this discussion happened, it says on the state system, it's 80-20 federal state or 80-20 federal local. But what y'all are saying is that by default now it would be 80-20 federal local, and that the state involvement would be considered on each project as an individual basis type thing?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that would also align it with the decision from 2018 and the thoughts brought before the committee by board members, and again, keeping the tip consistent with the predominant match choice, but extenuating circumstances brought back before TAC and Policy Board for a 20% state. And I do see a comment, Danielle, regarding the off-system roadways. That is that's more of like a state mandate of the federal, local. I don't know that we have a decision in that. Victor or Britton, can you all speak to that for Cat 7?
For the off system, can you go back to the chart that Brenton was showing earlier? And I think that addresses.
Yes. All right, let me scoot it over.
So for Cat 7 off system, they're all going to be local lets, so the locals are responsible for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that PSNE, that's part of your project cost that you know the city would still be responsible for that.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion. Okay, I have a motion to require a 20% local match that would allow by special vote on an on-system project by project basis to allow state matched funds to count as the local match and to fund transit at 10% of Cat 7 funding. And I have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? I do have one in opposition. The motion does carry. Would you like to state your opposition? Seeing none. Like I said, that motion carried. And we will move to agenda item 10 regarding public input received through October 2020.
Yes, sir. No new comments were received through the last month, but we will continue to bring any new comments before the committee.
Thank you. And agenda item 11 is member comments. Are there any member comments?
Yeah, this is Joseph Moley, City of Harker Heights. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for many years of friendship and camaraderie. This will be my last meeting with this organization. Friday is going to be my last day at the City of Harker Heights. I'm moving on to become the Assistant City Manager for the City of Lakeway. I'm not sure who my replacement will be yet, but again, just thank everybody for all the years of friendship, camaraderie, and the back and forth discussions that we've had have been great tools for me. And hopefully I'll stay in touch with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and best of luck in your new role.
You, Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is Daryl Burtner with Hill Country Transit. I also just want to express my thanks to the group overall for the Cat 7 consideration for the Cat 7 money. I want to assure you that it's needed. As you all know, we have an aged fleet. The larger fixed route buses are 12-year, 500,000 mile buses, and We are exceeding the useful life of a number of those. In fact, we're probably going to, well, we are planning to auction off 7 this fall, a little bit later this fall. So we're going to need to replace those, and this money will come in handy, more than handy. It's essential for that. So I just want to say thanks to everyone.
Are there any additional comments? Seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody.